Hello and welcome to episode 32 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Riley Kirkpatrick. Riley is a musician here in Athens, Georgia, but is also a certified peer counselor at the Alliance Recovery Center. The Alliance Recovery Center is a medically assisted treatment clinic that uses Suboxone, methadone, and other drugs to assist people in kicking opiates. We talk about harm reduction. We talk about how opiate receptors in the brain make detox really difficult without the assistance of some drugs for some addicts. And we talk about Riley's own personal history. I felt like this was especially pertinent for a number of reasons, not least of which is it seems like every other episode I do lately is talking to some former IV drug user, but also because North Georgia and really the greater part of the United States as a whole is being ravaged by an epidemic of opiate use and fentanyl overdoses. And people are dying left and right, and I feel like it's something we should talk about. If this is your first episode of Crash and Ride is a long-form interview podcast where I talk to musicians who've survived anxiety, depression, addiction, and abuse. The idea behind the podcast was that if musicians could have honest and open conversations about their own suffering, that we could start to see our suffering in others and maybe start to help each other, lift each other up. As I've said many times on this show, no one's going to take care of us but us. I am a working musician. I play drums. I've just, by the time you hear this, I will have just completed a week of touring with Chuck Leavell for the Rolling Stones and the Allman Brothers, Mike Mills, the bass player, vocalist, and keyboardist for the band REM, and Robert McDuffie, one of the world's premier concert violinists, as well as a full-string orchestra, and two amazing musicians from here in Athens, Georgia, two guitar players, William Tonks and John Neff, who was formerly of the Drive-By Truckers. And it's been an amazing week, but man, it has been an anxious week for me. And this is sort of a message to my fellow session players and sidemen. Man, you guys know this is a tough job. It's been a really anxious week. You don't want to disappoint Chuck Leavell, and you don't want to get fired. So, there's a lot of pressure, and man, my anxiety has been ramped up to 10,000, and it's been a real challenge. If you're a session person, if you're a sideman and you're out on the road and you're trying to fit into a band's culture and be part of that organization and you're struggling, hit me up at crashandride@protonmail.com. I'll shoot you my phone number. You can blow off some steam from your hotel room at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm here for that, man. I know what this job is like, and you don't want to complain, right? You don't want to be heard blowing off steam when you're allegedly living the dream. So if you're a session person, sideman, you're in the middle of an anxiety attack because you're trying to live up to your own incredibly hard expectations. crashandride@protonmail.com. Shoot me a line and we'll chop it up. After this run of dates with Bobby McDuffie and Mike Mills and Chuck Leavell is over, my next show is October 11th with the band Nuclear Wind Tour at Flicker Bar here in Athens. And then a week later, I'm playing at Buteco in Atlanta with the band 5/8. That's October 17th at 8 p.m. Buteco is a little East Atlanta, gastro pub Brazilian thing with a patio that's really nice, and hopefully by then it won't be 100 degrees out like it is right now. Here's a couple of quick announcements. Crash and Ride is brought to you in part by Greer Amplification. Greer Amps builds the best boutique effects pedals available. If you're looking for an overdrive, boost, fuzz, compressor, or tremolo that is rugged, road-tested, and at home, on stage, in the studio, or in your living room, Greer has the pedal for you. Nick and his staff strive to build the best products around with the best tone you've ever heard. They believe in their products, and they stand behind them too, backing each one up with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. Each Greer Amps product is hand-built in Athens, Georgia, USA. Go to www.greeramps.com or visit your favorite music retailer today. Crash and Ride is also brought to you in part by Jittery Joe's, a local coffee roaster based here in Athens, Georgia. They've got a special espresso blend named after the podcast. You can get Crash and Ride whole bean or ground in cans at all of their retail locations or off their website, or soon it'll be available on our website. We'll get to that in a minute, but you can go to jitteryjoes.com and order Crash and Ride there, or you can get Crash and Ride espresso in drinks at Hendershots Coffee. Hendershots is a musician-owned and operated coffee shop just steps away from the UGA campus. It's run by a guy called Seth. Seth is an amazing musician, a great guy, a really great dad, and he runs a great coffee shop. I highly suggest you go by there sometime later this fall. And I know I've been promising concrete dates on this for weeks and haven't delivered, but I've been just getting through this gig with Chuck and Mike and Robert McDuffie has been it's a lot. But so sometime probably late in October, maybe early November, I'm going to sit down and do a live episode of Crash and Ride at Hendershots with Bob Sleppy, the director of Nucci Space. Nucci Space is an unalloyed good thing here in the Athens, Georgia music scene. They provide subsidized mental health care for musicians in crisis. If you're having problems, you can go by Nucci Space, fill out a form, and if you qualify, and mostly you just have to be a musician in the Athens area, they'll send you to a counselor, and you'll pay like a $15 copay or something very fair like that. And it's saved many, many lives, including my own. Nucci Space also has rehearsal rooms that they rent at a very reasonable hourly rate. They have like a 365-day-a-year used gear sale where they sell gear that's been donated and then refurbished. There's a set of 3-ply Ludwig drums down there just waiting for somebody to take them home. If I didn't already have 11 drum sets, I would be all over that like ugly on a gorilla. Nucci Space does the Boys and Girls Rock Camp every summer. They have a recording studio where they teach young people to be recording engineers. You should support Nucci Space in any way that you can. If that means just booking time in their rehearsal studios, that's a great thing. If that means buying some of their used gear, that's also a good thing. If you're someone who's fortunate enough to have some tax liability you need to offset, Nucci Space is a 501c3, and any donation you make is fully tax deductible. Call Nucci Space at 706-227-1515 or go to nuci.org. That's nucci.org for more information. Speaking of nonprofits that I unconditionally support, if you're struggling with depression or anxiety, if you're contemplating self-harm and you need to talk to someone, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. It's 24/7. It's free. It's confidential. They have trained volunteers to help you through your crisis. 1-800-273-8255. Help is just a phone call away. If you're a trans person struggling with anxiety, depression, or gender dysphoria and you need to talk to a peer, you can call the Trans Lifeline's Peer Support Line, 1-877-565-8860, or go to translifeline.org. All right. This week's guest is Riley Kirkpatrick. Riley is a friend of mine. I had never met Riley before. I didn't know anything about the Alliance Recovery Center, but I reached out, and Riley was more than happy to come over. Riley is a lumberjack of a dude. Amazing, fantastic beard, covered in tattoos. Just doesn't look like your sort of standard mental picture of a healthcare professional, but incredibly warm, friendly, giving person. And man, there is a surprise twist in this interview. My mind was blown, and I think yours will be too. We had a great conversation. I'm really glad Riley came over. And if you need help, that the Alliance Recovery Center I'll put links to their website in the show notes. And if you need to talk to someone or maybe like you're trying to kick opiates, that might be a really good place to start. All right, with all that said, let's jump into our interview with Riley Kirkpatrick. All right, I'm here with Riley Kirkpatrick. Riley is let me get this right, certified addiction recovery empowerment specialist with a certified peer specialist certification in addiction recovery and harm reduction. You work at a clinic here in Athens, Georgia. Not going to name the clinic just for the interest of protecting everybody's anonymity, but welcome, Riley.
Thank you for having me.
And you're also a musician, as I understand.
I am, yes.
What do you play?
Mostly guitar, but I like a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Mostly stringed instruments.
So the clinic you work at is, I would say, predominantly a medically assisted treatment clinic, right?
Yes, we are an opioid treatment provider, and we offer buprenorphine and methadone in conjunction with more traditional therapy, group therapy, one-on-one. Yeah, but mostly the medication-assisted treatment, MAT, that's where that comes in.
Yeah, and is it funded through people's insurance or?
It really depends. Georgia's pretty difficult as far as insurance. Medicaid, really, unless it's pretty hard to get it covered. But there are some insurances that will cover a percentage or so much percent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of people pay out of pocket.
Yeah, and is it outpatient or inpatient?
It's outpatient. We do, depending on the other treatment facilities, we've definitely been able to have more relationships, better relationships in the last few years with what were traditionally abstinence-based programs. So essentially, our patients can connect with them and get more treatment than just in the walls of the clinic.
Right.
But if someone needs inpatient, and hopefully the treatment center will be willing to collaborate with us.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit more about harm reduction, because for a lot of people who aren't in the recovery community, that's a new idea, or people who might be in the need of seeking treatment who won't really understand like what other options are.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about harm reduction.
Yeah, and really medication-assisted treatment is a form of harm reduction in that it's technically, they consider it agonist therapies, where Suboxone's a partial agonist, methadone's a full agonist, and that traditionally abstinence-based treatment, they don't consider any kind of substitution to be recovery.
Right.
And through the lenses of harm reduction, it's very different in that any kind of improvement, anything in the direction of health or wellness is celebrated and encouraged. It's not necessarily a black or white, clean or not clean, and supporting people in various pathways.
Right. So my path to sobriety, I've talked a little bit on the show that, I'm part of the secret society that keeps me off drugs, was abstinence, pure abstinence. Like, I didn't go through a detoxification program because I never really developed a physical addiction. Mine was mostly just a miserable emotional addiction. But yeah, 12-step programs, traditionally, there's this assumption that when you walk through the door, your plan is to never use again, or any substitutes. Although I've known people who came to become free of alcohol through medications like Antabuse. But you contrast that to harm reduction, which in the case of the clinic where you're working as medically assisted treatment, other forms of harm reduction, of course, are needle exchange programs, or like in Europe, they have injection centers where there's medical staff in case someone ODs. And do you feel like, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but harm reduction seems to be more focused on saving lives necessarily than producing 100% sober people, at least for now.
Absolutely. 100%. There's, in a lot of abstinence-based treatment, there is the very high standard of complete abstinence. That may not be so high of a standard for some people, but for others, it's an incredibly high bar to get to. I remember in my own struggling towards finding recovery, someone asked me if I was clean, and I was like, yeah, I'm laying off the hard stuff, but I've been smoking weed. And he laughed real hard and made fun of me, and he was like, is that like kind of being pregnant? Like you are or you're not?
Right.
And it was hard for me because I was trying so hard, and in my world, I was getting better. I was trying to not engage in the behaviors that were killing me. So I think trying to shoot so high for that bar and falling short so often, it feels like nothing counts if it's not everything.
Right.
And I think we know that there's really just that different people recover differently. There's different pathways to recovery. And through harm reduction lenses, it's really, of course it's different with different situations, but any way that we are reducing the amount of harm is a good thing.
Yeah.
Needs to be celebrated and supported, really. I think so. I think this dynamic happens where we support people only if their behavior aligns with what we want.
Right.
And we do that a lot. I know I watched an intervention recently and really just kind of realized that that's the entire premise of the show. Like they get together, they take the last little bit of connection that the dependent person has, and they threaten it. They say, if you don't align your behavior to what we want, we're going to cut you off. And from the way that I've been learning to show up, both for other people, for peers, for myself, it looks very different. It's nowhere near as conditional. It's
right.
that I will sit with you, I will be with you, I will love you, I will support you, whether I don't even need to insert what I think needs to be their goal.
Right. Just to keep them alive.
Sometimes, yeah, and if that's what that looks like, is just keeping them alive. I think especially in the midst of this opioid epidemic, opioid dependence in comparison to so many other chemicals, it changes so much chemistry. The attempts that people make in finding abstinence, just real talk, by means of statistics, it takes a lot longer.
Right.
There's a lot more failed attempts. And what's happening now is people will shoot for abstinence and do this real hard back and forth, like total abstinence to using, back and forth. And some of these drugs, especially with fentanyl and so much of the heroin now, what would just be, or what they're hoping for, is just one use.
Right.
Ends up being the last.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, like medication assisted treatment massively helps. It reduces the rate of overdose tremendously.
Well, it's interesting. Recently I had a guest, Christian Lembach, who was on a few episodes ago, and he is a former IV drug user, and he was talking about how relapse in his mind is just part of recovery. There's a lot of people who will argue against the 12-step framework, saying, well, it only has like a 50% success rate. Well, that's for the first time you get sober. I mean, I got sober twice, relapse is part of it. But then I had Dave from the Dopey Podcast on 2 episodes ago, and Dave was like, relapses are killing people because there's fentanyl out there. So Suboxone and methadone are saving lives by keeping people from going out and getting,
Absolutely. Well, and not only... So much of the medication helps with cravings massively.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, people will use opioids, opiates, synthetic, not, it doesn't matter. It all affects us the same way. We get more and more opioid receptor sites. We plug them. We get a minute clean, however that may be. And we have all these opioid receptor sites that are wide open and screaming. And that can look like being physically ill. It can look like that screaming, which manifests itself in insane cravings. And, where people start doing really irrational behaviors, stealing from people they love.
Right.
Things that would never be expected from the person. And the medication, it plugs those receptor sites in a way that quiets down that screaming. That screaming stops.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is really important as far as with medication, that we need to acknowledge that there's a difference between dependence and addiction. And dependence is physical.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. But there are a multitude of behaviors that go along with addiction. And there's this false belief that if someone is to take Suboxone or methadone, that they are simply substituting one drug for another,
Right.
with a disconnect that, yes, they are dependent on really what is a medication, but that addictive behavior, when someone's in recovery, it's the exact same. You can't tell a difference if someone's on methadone and using it appropriately as prescribed as an abstinence-based person. You can't tell.
They're not intoxicated. They're just not craving dope.
Yeah.
Let's run through a series of quick definitions of terms for people who aren't in this world.
Absolutely.
So what's the difference between an opiate and an opioid?
Good question. Opiates are more naturally derived, and opioids are synthetic. However, it does not matter. We react and respond to them the exact same way. It does not mean that one is more safe if it's naturally derived, or it affects us the exact same way.
No one ever says to a dealer, "Is this heroin organic?"
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's also, what is fentanyl?
So fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, and it's stronger by means that you can use a much smaller amount. It is very cheap either to buy or to make, and it binds to the opioid receptor sites in a way that is fast and hard. It's a pretty short high. It doesn't last as long as heroin, and heroin's not as long as they all kind of have different lengths. The short acting ones quite often are the most people will choose the shorter acting ones for abuse.
Yeah.
The abuse potential is higher. That's often where in a lot of pharmaceuticals, they'll put chemicals in it to
Buffer it.
delay the effect.
Right, delay release. Yeah. Like a
Exactly.
patch or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is Suboxone?
Suboxone is what's called a partial agonist. All that really means is that it partially fills the receptor site. Like, if I have a cup of coffee and if I have an empty coffee cup and I fill it with marbles, I can fill it up all the way, but it's not really totally full. There's
Right.
still little gaps in there. There's space in there. That's kind of what Suboxone's like.
Right.
It fills the opioid receptor site, but not entirely.
Right.
And methadone would be
That was my next question.
the coffee. What's that?
I was going to ask, what's my next question is, what is methadone?
Yeah. So methadone is the full agonist, and it fills up every bit of space of that. And in this case,
So it offsets cravings without intoxication.
100%. What's so interesting about these medications that is very not understood is how wildly different they affect different people. And this is one of those things where people will either have an experience or know someone else who had an experience and will think that that's it across the board. And people with opioid use disorder, there are so many variables that will affect not only their treatment, but how opioids are affecting them. And like, I'll use an example. If someone is orally taking Lortabs,
Yeah.
so like taking a pill in their mouth, versus someone who's intravenously shooting heroin.
Yeah.
And let's say let's say the person orally taking the Lortabs has been using for 9 months, and the intravenous heroin user has been using for 20 years. They're both opioid dependent people, but what's happening in their chemistry is wildly different. Wildly different. So how both of those people would react or respond to these medications are very, very different. And it happens often where I was at a training once, and they were talking about Suboxone, and the man who was presenting was talking about how there was so little abuse potential, and there was a guy in the back that kept huffing and puffing, and you could tell he was really not liking what was happening. And he just kind of interrupted the whole thing and was like, "That's a load of crap. I've gotten high on Suboxone myself. You can't tell me it doesn't get you high. I've been high." And then everyone was like, "Oh," like,
Right.
like it's really dramatic.
Right.
But the reality is that the man had absolutely no history with opioid use dependence. His drug of choice was meth. He took a Suboxone once, and it's just not black or white. It's
Right.
really not, which is where, these are medications, and we need actual medical doctors, not playing doctors ourselves. And opioid treatment providers are incredibly, they're incredibly regulated. There's so many regulations and laws, and some of those misconceptions about like just going to a clinic and getting a bunch of free drugs. It's really incredibly not like that. You daily dose, you get 1 day at a time, and then very slowly phase up based on drug screens. And
so you're seeing people at this clinic in various stages of recovery and functionality, I'm guessing.
Definitely.
People who are showing up before work, people who show up because they don't have anywhere else to go.
Yep.
Yeah.
And some people that are incredibly high functioning, that are lawyers and doctors and judges, and most people who are uneducated about methadone or Suboxone would be shocked to learn that they were, and completely normally functioning in the world.
I was thinking about this interview a lot this week once I knew we were going to talk, and coming from a sort of standard 12-step background where abstinence is the goal, I was thinking a lot about there's a lot of prejudice against medically assisted treatment because the idea is that eventually you'll be substance free. But I'm also aware that there are people who come to opiate addiction from intense trauma, and with the reason that they get into dope in the first place is that they have a lot of anxiety and strong self-hatred, and the opiates quiet that. And asking someone to go cold turkey and detox completely and then immediately be faced with whatever trauma they've been through might be just too much to ask,
Yeah. In so many ways, that's the intention of the medication, is that it can hold you together enough to actually engage in treatment. And I think that that's overlooked quite often.
Yeah. Johnny Winter, the guitar player, became a heroin addict in the 60s and then remained a daily IV drug user until his manager took over his injections of methadone, or started treating it with methadone. I heard him tell his story a few years ago, and his manager, without telling him, tapered him off.
Wow.
Methadone, very gradually.
Yeah.
And one day, Johnny said, "Man, I'm really tired of this." And his manager said, "It's okay. You've been taking sugar water now for a month."
Yeah.
And so it's possible to transition off of methadone. It's not, sometimes recovery begins with just not killing yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And we have an option of doing that at the clinic as well. It's called a blind taper. So essentially people that are wanting to taper down but know that they have so much anxiety around the numbers.
Sure.
We just don't tell them the numbers and slowly swap out, because it's in a juice. It looks like a pink kind of liquid. They just slowly get more juice and less methadone, but aren't aware.
Yeah.
And then after so long of having only juice, then we're like, okay, it's been 2 weeks. You haven't had methadone in 2 weeks, and
yeah,
it's interesting.
So it says here after your name on my notes, CPS, which says to me that you didn't learn about opiate addiction in a trade school.
It's absolutely true. In my position, really what makes me fit for my position is my lived experience. I am not, as a certified peer specialist, it is not education in book form. It is that I have survived through opioid use disorder myself, and I have at different times of my life and or recovery been on use different forms of medication. It's taken me a very long time to learn about a lot of not only the medications but various pathways to recovery. I did not know there were multiple pathways for a really long time. I did 12-step abstinence-based for years. And when I moved here, I came down here and I was on Suboxone, and it very quickly became clear that either I couldn't talk about it, or if I did talk about it, that it was problematic.
You mean in meetings?
Not just in meetings, but I wouldn't talk about it in meetings anyway, because I do think it's kind of an outside issue. But even just with my recovery friends, with a sponsor, it was very much that that I wasn't really clean yet, and I wouldn't really be clean until I was off entirely. And I made a couple choices looking back that were harmful for me, but I didn't have much of a community where I could talk about this. I didn't have any taillights to follow, so to speak. And I tapered myself pretty hard and fast. In the last 10 years, in February it'll be 10 years, I've had two super fast slips, and both of them were right as I tapered myself down, got to nothing, and I tapered myself as fast as I could with getting through any kind of physical withdrawal. Uncomfortable but I didn't understand I didn't understand how it manifested itself in my mind, in my brain. I even just earlier talking about the receptor sites, I had no education about any of that stuff. And I really believed that if I tried hard enough, if I was strong enough, if I prayed hard enough, all these things, that it would go away. And I didn't. To summarize it, I destabilized myself pretty intensely.
And then a lot of those unwelcome thoughts came rushing in.
It was shocking. It was scary, and it was validating, which is, I know that's a lot of very different things kind of braided together. But I personally, I began using in the mid-90s. I was 14 when I started IVing heroin, and that many years of IV heroin use, I didn't understand how much I had chemically changed the natural function of my chemistry.
You were living in the Pacific Northwest then?
Yeah. And that time in the early mid-90s,
it was everywhere.
Oh yeah, it was so. I could get heroin easier than I could get an adult to get me cigarettes or alcohol.
Yeah.
It was everywhere. My first detox, I had just turned 15, and I just had years of detoxes, treatment centers, so many. Like I've been in so many institutions.
When I talked to Davey from the Dopey Podcast 2 weeks ago, we talked about how so many addicts that we know had comparably short periods of use and then years of just trying to get off of it.
Yes.
So you were 14. I assume there were other drugs that you were using before heroin.
Yeah, and when I initially got into the needle, like into IV drugs, it was with meth.
Yeah.
But quickly, heroin was definitely the center. It was I guess you'd say my drug of choice, which feels funny to say because it's like my drug of no choice. Right. Was what it felt like. It was a very long time. And I'm honestly, the last decade that I used just felt really sad.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't, I didn't believe myself anymore. There were so many times of like telling friends and family that I didn't want to be living this way. I didn't want to be doing these things. And I just could not stop.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand it. I had this very intense feeling of like, what is wrong with me? Mm-hmm. And, you know, being in and around the rooms for so many years too, I would see so many other people that could get it and I couldn't get it. And I thought there was this big universal it that I just couldn't get. I thought I was constitutionally incapable. I really did.
Yeah.
But the more I've learned over time, and my values and what's important to me has changed over time too. Mm-hmm. And even my language is different. When I said that earlier about unknowingly destabilizing myself.
Yeah.
Stability, like that's being stabilized. And there's so much when people first come into the clinic, that's really what we're going for. We're trying to get them at a stable dose. We're trying to get them where they can function without that, what feels like need. I mean, how your lungs need air is how, I don't really know metaphorically how to explain what it feels like when you need heroin, but it feels comparable to needing air. It does.
I think that the stability thing is hard for people who've never experienced it to even explain to someone who has never had stability what it is even that they're craving. Mm-hmm. Like in my conversation with Dave from the Dopey Podcast, we talked about the hamster wheel in your brain that not given any problems to solve, will find work for itself. Sometimes that is just creating anxiety. But like that inability to just have a day like of knowing what your emotional arc is going to be is, it's the addict's mind is it can be a really difficult place.
Absolutely.
So getting someone into a harm reduction program where they have the ability to say, you're going to be here tomorrow morning when we open the door, and you're going to get some methadone, and you don't have to deal with cravings all day. You're not going to have to steal money out of your grandma's purse, and you're not going to have to like pawn someone else's guitar or any of the things that you do to get drug money. To sort of get someone in and say, look, you're going to have a routine and you're going to have some predictability in your life. In a way, relieves a lot of stresses.
Yes, absolutely. And both methadone and Suboxone have methadone more so has a very long half-life. There is not that chronic, fast and hard, up and down. And when you're really not just with heroin, but with so many pharmaceutical opioids also, it is this, I mean, you're going 4, 6, 8 times a day. It's just this constant up and down. And when you get stabilized on either form of MAT, it's you're stable. Like there's not that up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And I have watched a lot of people kind of, it's hard to explain, but almost like unintentionally kind of get their stuff together.
Right.
Like and then they'll leave the clinic and it's like, okay, well, I don't gotta hustle anything up. I don't have to steal anything. There's no trouble to get in.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it's like, like, I wonder if I could get a job. Should I get a job? I'm kind of bored.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's,
I mean, you take some of the energy you took trying to procure drugs with no money and turn that into just actual like self-care.
absolutely.
You become a human institution, like a person.
Yeah. And that concept of someone getting stabilized physically,
Mm-hmm.
that really will happen with just the methadone, assuming that they find their stable dose.
Right. So before you came down here
Mm-hmm.
from the Pacific Northwest, you had some time, some sober time, but you were taking Suboxone?
Yes and no. I had a couple chunks of time,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a relapse I did the exact same thing every time I had gotten on. Well, at that time I'd been on methadone once and Suboxone once, but with each of them it was like I just wanted to get off as fast as I could because I thought it was wrong. Honestly, right. I really did. Like, just I had a lot of shame around it,
Mm-hmm.
so I got off as hard and fast as I could, and I had my jaw broken in Portland. I was robbed for like $8. It was ridiculous. And the hospital and surgeries, and they wired my jaw shut and gave me 2 huge bottles of liquid OxyContin because my jaw was wired shut. And I was fine when I took it, and I really did take it as prescribed. But when it ran out, something happened. That thing snapped, and I started using again. And I mean, if I was making jokes about my drug of no choice
Right.
before, like, this was a whole new level, and it was horrible. And to summarize, I ended up going to prison, and when I got out of prison, I was only on probation for 1 year, and I violated 8 times in that year. They relocked me up. Every single time I had a drug screen, it was positive for opiates. Every single time. It was insane. It was absolute insanity. And that was, I don't know, 12 years ago. You couldn't take the medication and be involved with the Department of Corrections. You can more now, and it depends on where you're at, but there has been a lot of misunderstanding around these medications for a long time. So anything through the court, they wouldn't allow it. And it's still like that. You can't, they won't give it to you in jail or anything like that.
Man, the fact that jail serves as de facto mental health care in this country makes, possibly of all the things that makes me crazy, and there's a lot of things that make me crazy, but the fact that, like, episode 15 of this show, I had Boo Ray on, who's a singer-songwriter from Nashville, and he'd done some prison time. And I said, I'd already turned the mics off, and it's a shame because this ended up being a really formative conversation for me. I said, based on your time in prison, what would you estimate the number of actual criminals in prison is? And he said, I'm going to be generous to the state and say 20%.
Yeah. When you said it, I was thinking between 10 and 20. That was my guess. At least from my experience when I was incarcerated, and that was in Washington State, but I would easily say 75 to 80% were nonviolent drug crimes, just like myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a huge thing. Like, in the last few years, becoming more involved with harm reduction, has taught me so much. It really has. And we have criminalized drug use in a way that just it doesn't make any sense. It does not make any sense. And we have decided and declared that substance use disorder is a disease. And we've, especially with brain science, neurology, there's so much research around just how it affects us neurologically, especially with opioid use disorder. And yet we incarcerate people for showing symptoms of their disease. Yeah. And so often too, it's not, they're just nonviolent drug crimes. Yeah. And it was so embedded in my head that I was wrong and bad. And it perpetuated this, self-hatred.
Shame cycle.
And shame
spiral, as a friend of mine refers to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this is a discussion for maybe another program, but you say it doesn't make any sense that so many people are in prison, but if you consider it to be an industry,
yes, absolutely,
it makes all the sense in the world.
It does, and by means of like systemic forms of racism and just the profit of the prison industrial complex, it does make a lot of sense, just not through the lenses of recovering from substance use.
Yeah. So you made your way to Athens, Georgia.
Yes.
And
it was really interesting. Like, if you told me then that I'd be doing the kind of work that I am now, I probably wouldn't. I probably wouldn't believe you. It seemed very odd, and I have moments where I'm like, I do this kind of work in Georgia. Like, what happened? How did I get here?
How did you get here?
I came down, and I was so stuck in that inability to stop. And my mom had come down years prior, and she had met a man on the internet and moved to Warner Robins. And I knew I didn't like Warner Robins, but literally it was like the week that I got off probation. Yeah. I left, and I don't know. I don't necessarily believe that like geographicals will cure your everything, but I had so much history there, and I had such a strong desire for recovery. I really did. Mm-hmm. And it felt so horrible wanting to be in recovery so bad, and just feeling like I had this innate inability to do so. And so I got on Suboxone. I came down here. I had no idea how hard it was to get Suboxone down here. At the time, I want to say there were like 5, maybe 6 doctors in the entire greater Athens area, and they all had really long waiting lists. Right. And I only came here with like 30-day supply and was really nervous. Yeah. But I ended up having a doctor in Elberton, and there was just so much kind of stumbling through life and early recovery that happened. And I did the 12-step thing, and I didn't talk about being on Suboxone because I was getting it from an office-based treatment provider. There wasn't really any accountability there. Right. There wasn't any treatment that was offered. And it was, of course, good. I was taking accountability for my own recovery, and I got really involved. I got involved in everything. But at the same time, I was carrying a lot of shame also. My thoughts and opinions have changed quite dramatically over the last handful of years. But again, I focus on different things. I think different things are the point. For me now, it is wildly important that, and I'm just going to break it down into the now, the today, that I, breathe in and breathe out for the rest of the day, and I don't shoot dope in between, and my head hits my pillow tonight, and that I don't use.
Yeah.
And the ways in which I do that, I don't have as much I guess I would say I don't believe that there's a monopoly on the truth of recovery. And just like when I was talking about earlier about destabilizing myself, when I changed the lenses that I look through about really that it was more important to me to stay in recovery, to not use, than it was for me to feel like I had I think I had a lot of ego wrapped up in my recovery before. Like anything, whether it be like dates or number of sponsees or all of these things that I think looking back on were really secondary to my well-being. But I was looking back on it, I think I was putting a lot of time and energy into not the meat and potatoes of recovery. What my recovery is now, I guess I would say. But like I said too, though, when I started, just that a lot of this has changed. And when I started doing this work professionally and really being taught and trained and it being reiterated over and over that people come into recovery in a multitude of different ways, and we support them and show up for them no matter what. And we meet them where they're at. And a lot of it was through the lenses of supporting other people, that whether I have someone in front of me that came in through a 12-step door, or someone that was saved and has found Christ, someone else that, their pathway was through methadone and talk therapy, or just so many different kinds of pathways. But at the same time, it gave me permission to let my recovery get more broad and roomy and all-inclusive.
Right. So if there was an addict who's listening now who's really ready to try Suboxone or some combination of medically assisted therapies, how would you suggest that they get the help? Like, you found a doctor in Elberton. I guess it's important to mention, if you're listening to this and you're not living in Georgia, you may not understand that North Georgia, especially sort of north of Athens or even like Commerce, Georgia, there's a just explosion of meth and heroin use. So finding a doctor in Elberton doesn't surprise me at all.
I want to say real quick too, just if there are any local listeners, I also, for the few people that are actively shooting heroin, I give out fentanyl test strips so they can essentially check their drugs before they do them. Make informed decisions about what they're doing. And because these drugs are illegal, they're not regulated, it ends up being so much more dangerous because of this whole criminalized thing. But last week I had a lot of positive fentanyl test strips that were returned to me, and they were saying that they could not find any heroin without fentanyl in it. So they were trying to make informed choices. They were trying to choose to use heroin without the fentanyl in it, and they couldn't find it. And 2 days later, I heard about someone else who had overdosed, who it took 3 Narcan kits to revive them. So that's 6 doses.
Yeah.
And this was a person that was in abstinence-based recovery who had a relapse.
Yeah.
And barely by the skin of their teeth were revived. And we've had 3 overdoses in Athens and 1 died in the last 5 days. And it's really like, and I think really when I look at it through those lenses, I just don't believe there's any room for self-righteousness anymore. I don't believe there's not room for talking about doing this the right way or the wrong way.
This is the way is to get people off dope.
Yeah. The way is to stay alive.
Where can someone get fentanyl test strips?
Well, assuming that we're speaking to listeners that are in different places.
Yeah.
It's Athens area. They can come to me. I'm okay with saying the clinic that I'm at. So I'm at Alliance Recovery Center. We are on Sycamore, right off of Atlanta Highway. And again, my name's Riley. You can come straight in and say, "Is Riley here?" And I will get you fentanyl test strips and Narcan.
That was my next question. Where can people get Narcan?
Yeah.
From Alliance Recovery.
Yes, I will hook them up. There's the Georgia Overdose Prevention. There's Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition does a bunch of good stuff. And I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but in not too long, there will be harm reduction services, namely syringe services, a needle exchange. That is finally getting up and going. We had some laws passed recently, so it has been illegal to have a needle exchange in the state of Georgia. So that has finally been changed. But the fentanyl test strips also you can buy online, either singly. They're let me see. They're $2 a piece if you buy in bulk. Like when we get them, we get a box of 200 for 150. So that's like $150 a piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's important to have.
That's 75 cents a piece.
200 for
yeah.
150.
Yeah. 75.
Or am I saying 100? A box of 100 for 150?
Anyway.
Yeah.
Look, it's 2X addicts trying to do math.
Yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, but if there's an addict who's listening in Chicago or somewhere, where certainly there's resources they can search for online or ask other addicts or
harm reduction services. They are proven to be effective. They didn't pop up in America until really the AIDS crisis in the early 90s. And it is 100% proven that they effectively save lives, reduce the increase and spread of HIV AIDS, of hepatitis C. I also will say I had hepatitis C for 20 years and just finally finished my treatment probably about 15 months ago, and finally have been cured of Hep C.
One of the people dearest to me in life was part of the trial for that.
Yeah.
And is all their hepatitis C free now too.
Yeah.
So how long, you say in Athens, you maybe because you were experiencing some shame about your Suboxone treatment, but you tried a fast and dirty detox, and that destabilized you enough that you started using again.
Yeah. Well, and it wasn't even again. I used once, and I had never used in this town. And I Googled heroin arrests, and I found out about the Bluff in Atlanta, which is crazy. I mean, it was crazy.
You drove all the way to Atlanta?
I drove all the way to Atlanta, which I had that desperate thing had kicked back in, which, and it was insane. Like I had not shot dope in at least 3 years, probably 3.5 years. And I couldn't do this. I couldn't have a conversation like this because my head was like, where can I get it? Where can I go? How much money do I have? How much should I get? Where can I get some syringes? I couldn't, my brain was like a nonstop you need heroin. You need heroin now. Yeah. And after having not used in so long, but again, though, a lot of that, like now I could explain to you, I could show you on a whiteboard what was happening in my brain and body.
Biologically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that.
Do you feel like it was like an anxiety spike and your emotional, your desire emotionally was to stop that anxiety as soon as possible?
Some of it, but I want to be real clear too. Like we were talking earlier about different things affecting different people, and I want to be clear that my experience is not everyone else's. Like, and I recently supported someone who was on Suboxone, did a taper even faster than I did, and it's been like 6 months and she's still doing phenomenal. Granted, she doesn't have the length of use history that I did, but still, regardless, it's not. I just want to be really clear that I'm telling my experience.
Sure.
But this is not everyone experiences that. But that's that thing too, where it's so important too that people understand that different medications are really made and suitable for different people in different places. Yeah. There will so often be this, or people will ask what medication is better, what's worse, or people will be like, okay, well, I'm okay with that Suboxone, but not that methadone, with a disconnect that there are some people that no matter how much Suboxone they take, it will not hold them. And for that particular person, methadone is much more suitable. And there's this naltrexone, the opioid blocker, in these Vivitrol shots, and people love them, especially the jails and the probation officers, because they're an antagonist actually. But you can't force someone to be ready to have a shot like that if they organically have an inability to stay clean for the 10 days to 2 weeks that it takes even before they can get that shot. But people aren't cognizant of that.
I think part of the hazard of the carceral state is there's a punitive quality to the way that they treat drug use. Like,
definitely,
you're less than because you're an addict, and therefore you deserve to be punished. And I'm going to deny you the pleasure of drugs in a way that, it's this kind of patriarchal, punitive thing that I think is.
We do it. I think in the recovery community, we do it to each other sometimes too.
Yes.
And we have this thing where we believe that people have to hit a bottom in a way that, and that may be true for some people, but when treatment is denied or, you're not ready kind of thing, and it's that same thing, like really the person's behavior won't align with what we want from them.
Right.
And if you look at any other medical model, we would never, we wouldn't be like, oh, you have a broken arm? Well, when you've broken both your legs too, then we'll treat you.
Yeah, you don't have enough cancer for us to start chemotherapy.
Yeah, we do so many things. I had someone around me, my mom actually became a huge fan of me on medication because just really of how well I would do. And she would say to me, she'd say, Riley, if you had type 2 diabetes and you needed your insulin, would you be rushing your way to not needing that insulin and just doing it with diet and exercise way before kicking yourself into all this medical problems because that insulin is so stigmatized? Like, no, I wouldn't. And insulin isn't that stigmatized, not like these medications are. And it wasn't until people kind of questioned me in those ways that I was like, huh, really? And it, like, if we're calling this a disease, but we won't treat it in a medical way with a medical model,
Talk to me a little bit about the moment after your relapse.
It was horrible.
So you went to the Bluff, you copped, you found syringes.
Yep, and I was pulled over, and
coming out of the Bluff.
And I keistered my dope.
Wow.
Made it, yeah. And they found the syringes, and I was shocked that they didn't. And I told them I had an NA key tag hanging from my keys. I had an AA coin. And they were like, dude, what do you do? And I just told them, I was like, I don't know. I came to cop, blah, blah, blah. I did end up, I used after they let me go. But it was nothing short of, I was suicidal. I was totally suicidal. And I didn't know if it was do I want to kill myself with heroin, or do I want to use the heroin and hope I'll enjoy it and then kill myself? I did not expect any of that. I didn't expect that. I really thought I could muscle my way through it. Mm-hmm. I thought I could be strong enough. I thought I had a good spiritual connection. It was humbling in a lot of ways. And literally the next day I called the doctor. They got me in the next day, the same doctor out in Elberton. And immediately, as soon as I got back on my medication, I was my normal Riley self. Mm-hmm. It was mind blowing. But at the time I was just you know what? I'm going to stop stigmatizing this the way that other people do. This is my insulin, and I'm okay with that. Yeah. I'm okay with that. I would not be shaming myself if I had heart disease. I would not be shaming myself with any other medication. Mm-hmm. And that was so much of the hard part. So much of the hard part for me was navigating through the shame and stigma of what I thought recovery was supposed to look like, right, and how horrible these medications are supposed to be. But the reality for me, these have been absolutely life-saving. I do not believe I don't think I would have been stabilized for this long. I think I would, because I'm well traveled all over the country. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if I want to use, I will find it. I will get it. It wasn't a geographical thing why I stopped using.
So you've been stable for a while now.
Yeah. Let me think. The last time I used briefly, literally one day, was in, I want to say November of 2015. So 4 years. It's kind of interesting because of in abstinence-based culture, you count time from the last time you used. Often in harm reduction culture, it'll look a little bit different. It'll say someone used, it'll be more about a percentage of time. Mm-hmm. Say someone used 1 week over a year's time. Right. They would have been clean 98% of the time or something, mm-hmm. something like that. Yeah. Just like the yardstick for success mm-hmm. looks different. Yeah. But again, though, the lenses that I look through are different. I feel like it kind of has to be also doing this work and just cheering people on. Yeah. And keeping this you can do it. Right. Because they can. Yeah. They can't. Recovery is possible. It is accessible. I pray for a day where there will be so many different models where I didn't try the same thing 27 times, which is what I did. Yeah. I mean, I've been in 14 inpatient treatment centers, and every single one of them was modeled the exact same way. Yeah. And methadone also, the first time I got on methadone, my third day on, like as soon as my body was well, I stopped using.
Yeah.
And that was so that I didn't use for those couple years, tapered myself, had the jaw break.
Right.
And that was that.
Right. Well, I usually wind these interviews up with a series of 10 questions, loosely modeled on the Bernard Pivot questions. He's a French radio host, but they're the ones used at the end of the inside the actor studio.
Okay.
Those questions. These are different. I came up with these on my own. So if you're ready, we can jump into that.
Sure. Let's do it.
The first question is, what is the fondest memory you have of a meal that you've had?
Of a meal?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd say probably my uncle barbecuing steak.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know my uncle too well. And
where's he live?
What's that?
Where's he live?
He lives in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My father passed about 3 or 4 months ago maybe, and I saw my uncle, and that was the last time or the first time since that steak.
Mm-hmm.
Actually.
Yeah, how old were you? Do you remember?
When the steak was?
Yeah.
I was an adult. There was more to it than that, though. Like I was in the...
Oh, there always is.
Yeah.
This question's more about community, I think, that people realize. Yeah.
Well, and I was in a house of family that didn't know me that well. I'm actually trans also. I'm transgender.
What?
Wait, what? Yeah.
I wish this was video right now so people could see my face and could see Riley.
In my big beard and my...
A fucking handsome beard. A
Yeah.
good beard.
Yeah, you would never, ever, ever know that
Barrel
I'm trans.
chest,
Yeah,
strong.
no, I'm like visually the epitome of
a dude.
masculinity.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, so that... Well, in that... I'm kind of selective about when and how I talk about that because it will become the center point, you know, or if that's the first thing I say, then it's can be focused on. But I hadn't seen a vast majority of my family since I literally was a little girl.
Uh-huh.
And so when I had that steak, like there was my entire family there, and they were really fascinated. It was literally like we had met for the first time. It was very much what it felt like.
Do you think that your struggle with gender identity is part of what was driving your drug use?
Yes and no. Like I struggle with substance use disorder, and I don't think like because I'm trans, I was a drug addict. Like I don't necessarily think it's like that. But without a doubt, I had a very hard time getting comfortable in myself. And when I went through girl puberty was when my suicide attempt started. And immediately after, as soon as I started using chemicals, I loved it. I felt comfortable. And honestly, my recovery, like I had to transition as far as recovery stuff too. I can't imagine ever finding recovery had I not transitioned, for sure. Yeah.
I'm still.
Yeah, you'll.
I'll be there in a minute. Just
Yeah.
let me. That's amazing. Right, and fascinating. And beautiful. You're my second trans guest, but I didn't know it going in.
Yeah.
Well, second question. What is the most frightened you've ever been?
Oh, trauma that I experienced on the streets. I just kind of want to keep it at that, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, we know you got your jaw broken. That's fucking horrible.
Yeah, but I did like using so young, and there was a lot like I did the street thing. I was a little gutter punk. There was a lot of homelessness. It was really interesting though, because finding my way into recovery in my 30s, but it very much felt like I was growing up for the first time.
Yeah.
Like I was learning how to have bank accounts and make dental appointments and things that,
Yeah, see a doctor for reasons other than drug seeking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What is the thing in your life that you've lost that you regret losing the most?
Probably my pride and my dignity for 20 years. But I feel like I've recovered enough of that now.
Yeah.
But there was a hard, I did not feel worthy for a very long time. I didn't feel worthy of love and respect or dignity or I didn't feel human for a really long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many funerals I've been to of someone who overdosed and everybody was like, oh man, he was such a sweet guy. And I'm always like, of course he was.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be a shitty person and be a junkie unless you're just so stupid rich that you don't need the help of other people.
Yeah.
And, it's always like, he was such a sweet guy, except for that time he stole my guitar or whatever. And it's like, you have to just give way in life so much because you have so many needs, or one big need, really.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Tell me a time you experienced an act of kindness from a stranger.
I don't know if this technically is a stranger. It's kind of lots of strangers and somewhat acquaintances. At one point, so now that you know that I'm trans,
Yeah.
when I went to prison, it was very dramatic. I have been incarcerated with men, with women, but the bulk of my time I was segregated. And being trans, they would not send me to treatment for a really long time, and I needed treatment really bad. There was one place they sent me there, and they had men on one side, women on the other, and as soon as I got there, they took a look at me and sent me away. And so I had all these really creative punk friends in Olympia, Washington, and they put on secret cafes and they sold art and they played punk shows and they raised $10,000 and they sent me to treatment. And the bulk of them I didn't know how and where a lot of that money came from.
Yeah.
But it is as beautiful as that was and as incredible as that kindness was, I used probably within 2 days of getting out. And I hated on myself for quite a while. I thought something was wrong with me. And I didn't know what. I did not know what was wrong with me. Why would I keep doing this?
This podcast has two unofficial kind of mottos or slogans. One is loud guitars save lives, because it's about musicians in recovery. But the thing that's emerged over and over, and this is sort of I've interviewed every kind of musician on this program, and I've got some classical musicians lined up, because man, they suffer a tremendous amount of anxiety and perfectionism and self-hatred. But the punk thing is the roots of this program, and the slogan that's kind of emerged from that is that no one is going to take care of us but us. And one of the reasons I'm so grateful for my punk rock background is because I have seen over and over that community lift each other up, as a family. And
yeah. We say that in the harm reduction world too. Nothing about us without us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your favorite place to play shows? You played shows?
Yeah. I'm gonna go right back to like 1990s Riot Grrrl stuff in Olympia, Washington.
It was Ground Zero.
Yeah, that was
Bratmobile, Bikini Kill.
Yep.
Kathleen Hanna, that whole scene.
Mm-hmm,
K
that
Records.
was
Yeah.
K, Kill Rock Stars.
Yeah.
Chainsaw, Donna Dresch, Team Dresch. Yeah, that was.
Jody from Team Dresch was in this other band called Hazel.
She was in like North Carolina for a while, I think.
Oh yeah, I didn't know. 5'8", my band toured with Hazel.
Yeah,
had an amazing time.
Very cool. I think they're all back in Portland now. But yeah.
Visa and income considerations aside, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
Oh, I want to go to one of these, like, I want to live in one of these other first world countries that are, like, I don't even know. I would have to research more. But
you mean like where harm reduction was invented?
Yes, like where
Finland.
They've stopped criminalizing this.
Yeah.
Where
Portugal.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just such a different, that something has been pulling on my heartstrings for a minute now, and I just feel so passionate about this stuff, and it's so hard being in a culture and community of people that either are avidly against it, resist it, or don't know about it. Just whatever. It's just not. It's just not a part of the norm, and I would love to be somewhere where it was.
Do you have a guitar that you're particularly in love with? Do you have a perfect instrument? Do you own it? Or is there one you just like, I wish I had that guitar?
I had a Gibson Les Paul that did not survive the entirety of my addiction. I also have a Martin that I do currently have. Mm-hmm. And that one, actually, I love my Martin. It had some damage done to it, so I probably couldn't even have like sold it or pawned it if I did try, although I didn't. But when I came down here, Scott Baxendale did a beautiful, beautiful job.
I think we're on 5 straight episodes where Scott's name comes.
Really?
Yeah, just he finds his way onto every show.
Sure.
Baxendale Guitar, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, we're not getting paid for that either.
No, he's an amazing guy who does amazing work.
He is.
So he fixed your Martin?
He did. Yeah, and that's currently, and I've had that guitar longer. Wow, for years, at least 20 years.
Yeah. Is there an instrument? This is the usual question that follows that one, but I think I already know the answer. Is there an instrument that you've lost to theft or pawn or whatever that you wish you could have back?
I've lost so much equipment over the years. But that Les Paul definitely kind of takes the cake.
Yeah. What was the finish on it?
It was white. It had gold pickups, marble fretting. Mm-hmm. It was beautiful.
So, recently I was coming back from a gig and saw a strange light in the sky. It was really late and we were really tired. And for a second I was like, I'm not a UFO guy, but I was like, is that a UFO? And I turned to my co-pilot, who's Dan Horowitz, the bass player in 5'8", and I said, Dan, what is that? And he was like, I don't know. It's kind of weird looking. And for a second I thought, I think I'm about to see a UFO. And I thought, there's no one I'd rather see a UFO with than Dan. Because he's such a funny guy. It turned out to be a cell phone tower, but who, if you were riding late at night and you saw a UFO, who would you hope was in the other seat?
I want to say my dad, and I'm sure some of that's because he just recently passed, but even if he didn't, he was a fun dude, and he would have been fun to experience that with. Yeah.
This is the last question. If you can imagine a taxi that can go anywhere in time or space, and you got into the taxi instead of the driver. Hey, man, take me home. Where is home?
I keep thinking, but like my first feeling was my wife.
Yeah.
My wife feels like home.
Yeah. How long have you been married?
Not long. 2 years. We've only been together 5, and it's my first marriage, and I'm pushing 40.
Yeah.
Which it feels like that doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
I put it off a long time.
Yeah. Well, seems like you're in a good place, though.
Yes, I am. And I think that was a lot of it, was that I knew I wasn't ready to be the kind of husband or partner that I wanted to be. I really wanted to parent or co-parent too, and I wouldn't put myself in that position without knowing that I could.
Right.
You know.
I spent most of my life thinking I wasn't capable.
Yeah.
Parenting. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't steady enough. I wasn't responsible enough, you know? And then I met someone, my sweet wife, and she was like, nobody's ready to parent. You just start parenting, you know? And then we adopted our beautiful daughter, and the rest has been amazing. So
it is beautiful.
Riley, this has been really wonderful. I'm so glad you were able to do this.
Yeah, me too. I do too. Anytime I talk like this or talk about so much of my history in active addiction, there's part of me that just feels it's really important to say that my life is not like that anymore.
Yeah.
That I felt like I was having such a hard time explaining how hard it was that I couldn't stop using. Mm-hmm. And I don't use anymore. Like I mean, it sounds cheesy. It feels cheesy to say, but I really feel like I have found freedom.
Yeah.
And I did not know that was possible. And there, like that sense of hopelessness, to feel and live and exist in a state of hopelessness for so long, and then to have hope it's so big and so beautiful and so powerful. And I feel like I didn't say much about that, and I have to say at least something about that. So,
well, I always thought those PSAs that it gets better. Things are really important for kids who are struggling, but also, like, as a musician who struggled for many years just to feel worthy of being able to play, to live a life free of like guilt and shame and fear. Like, it gets better.
Yeah. I didn't know that I would ever genuinely, sincerely like my life.
Yeah.
Like, really, like
what a gift, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I really wouldn't change much.
Yeah.
And that's miraculous, really.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you came. Thanks, man.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Well, that was a surprise and pretty cool. I want to thank Riley for coming and being a part of this. I think that the work that the Alliance Recovery Center is doing is really important. If you need help, you can find them online. Just go to alliancerecoverycenter.com. You can go to their actual physical address, 119 Sycamore Drive here in Athens, Georgia, or call 706-850-2121. You know, there's a lot of debate in the recovery community about whether methadone and Suboxone and medically assisted treatment are a good thing, but I think that the debate ends when people start dying of fentanyl overdoses, and whatever it takes to keep people on this side of the dirt is okay with me. Remember, if you're struggling with anxiety and depression and you need someone to talk to, if you're contemplating self-harm, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. That's 24/7. It's free. It's confidential. 1-800-273-8255, or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. If you're a trans person, you're struggling with anxiety and depression and gender dysphoria, and you need to talk to a peer, call the Trans Lifeline's peer support line at 1-877-565-8860, or go to translifeline.org. Thanks, as always, to Jake Kreger. He was the first guest ever on the show, and ever since then, he's given me tips and show notes on how to make the show better. If the show is better now than it was then, it's thanks to Jake. Thanks also to Gene Wolfolk and the band The Powder Room. All of the music you hear on this show is made by the band The Powder Room and can be found on their first album, Curtains. I believe there's still vinyl available. If you go to their Bandcamp page, Google Bandcamp, Powder Room, Athens, Georgia, Curtains. It will take you right there. That whole album is extraordinary. I played in the Powder Room, not on that record, but on a later record. If you want to see a picture of a band van burning to the ground, go to the Bandcamp page and look up the album Lucky. That's when I was in the band. I managed to get all of our gear out of that van except for one amplifier and 2 speaker cabinets, but that was a wild, wild morning. Thanks also to Heil Audio for these 2 PR40 microphones that I've been using on the podcast ever since I got them from them. These are great microphones, and I really love the sound of them, and you probably will too if you have a podcast. So Heil Audio, the Heil PR40, it's a good podcast microphone. Thanks to Jittery Joe's and Greer Amplification for your continued sponsorship and friendship. Those are 2 companies I really believe in, and if you happen to make your way by there, mention that you heard about them on the podcast. That only makes our community stronger. Hey, T-shirts are available for pre-order. Go to our Facebook page. Go to our website when that's finally finished. I didn't really get into that right now. But T-shirts are $20 plus $4.50 shipping, and they say "Loud Guitars Save Lives" on them, and they've got the logo. Go check them out. There will be more designs and more shirts, and maybe hooded sweatshirts sometime this winter if it ever gets cold. God, it's so hot right now. It's so hot outside. It's like 100 degrees. Until we speak again, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Go see live music. Support your favorite band, and remember, loud guitars save lives.